Hot Water History, episode 137, Wednesday night. Richard, what's going on?
It's amateur hour in our day, and perhaps that's a good thing. That's the white pill.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we usually use the idea of amateur hour as a pejorative, particularly for people who, for example, go out on New Year's Eve or the night before Thanksgiving and try to hang with the real drinkers and the real alcoholics slash social alcoholics in the bar scene or at the bar scene and are participating in those events and those days. But amateur hour in this case is, has there any ever been a time in which credentials mean so little and the institutions that back the licensure and all of the authorities that are supposed to give imprimaturs to the various professions, law, medicine, the democratic process? Well, they're so deconstructed and there's these institutions are crumbling. The university system, even when one might call, and I see this as a real inherent danger, is something that, for example, Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk speak of, is the inherent danger that emerges from DEI affirmative action initiatives that land unqualified individuals to be advanced through the job market and are put in places of not just authority and oversight, but real control. And should their expertise not match the demands of the position, well, then people are endangered. We're seeing that in manufacturing in Boeing. We're seeing that in the people who fly the planes that Boeing makes and constructs. We're seeing certainly in the medical profession, is there ever been a time where doctors are more discredited? I suspect that we could go back to the period in which frauds like Joseph Lister with his vaccination programs, which have been proven to be utterly inconsequential and quite harmful in abating anything that we considered formally as epidemic-like diseases, ranging from smallpox all the way through to, some suggest, and I've come to the conclusion too, through my own research, that even polio vaccination is rather unnecessary. That what has caused the elimination of what we considered epidemic diseases has been better nutrition, better sanitation that has eliminated the prospect of widespread public contamination and spread of whether they be respiratory diseases or contracted through whatever, the something like cholera with the lack of proper plumbing and sanitation.
Okay, that's a lot. Let's go through the article that you wrote because this is what we're going to talk a lot about.
Hmm.
You talked a little bit about a homily that was given that inspired you to write this. Was there anything else that's on your mind?
Well, what the priest in the daily mass homily had said was, he implored us in the congregation to step away from being armchair theologians and ecclesiologists, as I'll reference, or I do reference in the piece on hotwaterhistory.com in the blog section. And what that impressed upon me was, we need, I would argue, quite the opposite, that particularly the Catholic faithful, armed with sensus fidelium, or that holy sense of the faith, are being called, perhaps like no other time in the church's history, outside of Nicaea to steer, direct, correct, and govern bishops who are not even filling the role of shepherds anymore. They're the wolves among the sheep, posing not just as sheep, but really as the shepherds, leading us astray and away from salvation, or leading individuals and especially prospective converts and people who are we're supposed to be evangelizing away from the truth. If they're not espousing the truth as the supposed successors of the apostles, how is it that they're being effective clergymen and conduits of grace and mediators of
Yeah.
the special offices, the graces that their offices confer upon them? It's an abrogation of their responsibilities. So I feel as though I'm gonna break into a Malayan, like Javier Malay, Viva los armchair, whatever armchair specialists or armchair scholars is in Spanish.
Let's pull it up.
Hmm. I must say too, I'm really looking forward to your analysis on this because unlike most of the times when I write a piece, I send it to you pretty quickly and then you respond in rather short order with some questions or edits or inquiries. And this time I'm a blank slate here in terms of receptivity of I have no idea what you're going to say. I
Yeah,
shouldn't say I have no
I
idea what you're
figured
going to
we'd
say.
talk about it, so we'll save some of my thoughts.
Okay.
Do you want to read it? Do you want
You
to
go
switch
ahead. I
off?
like when you read you're a good
Okay.
narrator.
The armchair. One of the clear benefits of our formerly prestigious institutions crumbling due to the tyranny of subterranean standards is that the credentials and imprimaturs they dole out carry little to no weight. It's a solid thesis statement.
Hmm.
Ponder for a moment. Thanks to affirmative action injustices, does anyone walking around with a BA or BS, initials more appropriate than ever, really impress? How about a PhD in fields respected just a couple of decades ago? The great Tom Woods, in a recent missive, reviewed some of the paper proposals for symposia sponsored by the preeminent professional historical associations. Do you mean that you don't suspect that an entire paper written on the queering of the Pequod War won't attain the same cultural heights of Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis or Emily Zola's, I don't, Jacques?
Emile Zola's J'accuse. It was
Yeah.
the famous essay regarding his accusations surrounding the Dreyfus affair at the turn of the 19th and the 20th centuries. One of the most influential essays, perhaps in world history.
Yeah, there's some French in here that
All
I'm
right,
not gonna even
I'm
try.
happy to correct you.
How dare you, bigot? That he, she's, or zigzags paper does not become the historical phenomenon it ought to be, just indicates, quote, how much work there is left to do. Of course, to vanquish any anachronistic connection and preference society might still have with truth, goodness, and beauty. A PhD in history just ain't what it used to be.
So when I wrote that line about how it indicates that there's just much more work left to do, I was channeling the Wednesday Journal and Meanwhile in Oak Park.
I picked up on that.
Okay.
Kamala Harris supposedly holds a JD. This is a great line. Unless there is a Latin phrase that can be acronymed from Montel Williams' lesser side piece into JD, well, I'm afraid her very essence makes my argument vis-a-vis the legal profession case closed. Proven now is a long-held suspicion. Your doctor is not Albert Schweitzer or Hugh Laurie from House MD. It is not that medicine is an ignoble pursuit, but perhaps because of the high time preference and demand for physical health, often today turned into temporary pharmaceutical relief. Most doctors are owned. owned by the government, owned by big insurance, owned by big pharma, owned by the licensure organizations, owned by the former three. The founders of the American Medical Association considered it imperative to form a highfalutin de facto union of physicians to crush alternative medicine. That is, alternatives to the Rockefeller petroleum pharmaceutical health complex. Just glimpse back at what happened to doctors and medical researchers who, during the COVID pandemic, dared to defy Dr. Puppy Torturer, Dr. Science, Anthony Fauci. Truth is, quote, public health is a sleek veneer for what old practitioners used to proudly call eugenics. A public educated in government schools by a lot of PhETs, please contain your laughter, is too mollified, too dull, too ignorant to notice the deadly doppelganger substitute. I think it's one of my favorite openings to on Hot Water History, right there. I'm trying to hold off on some recency bias here, but this ranks pretty high for me on the hotwaterhistory.com blog.
You're making me blush.
Proven now is a long held. Oh, wait, I just read that. On a positive note, then, allow me to laud the alternative, the armchair expert. It seems that Dax Shepard and some cute Indian girl have an eponymous podcast done tongue in cheek. Of course, since Shepard claims to be something of a know it all and the cute Indian girl challenges his notions. I've never listened, nor will ever listen, but let's proceed to extract the lingua de jeu.
Long de jus means
For a moment.
tongue from the cheek.
The present day is the triumph of the armchair. Just today at Mass on the feast of the great Saint Monica, the priest extolled us in the congregation to live like saints, and to do so, we must stop being the faithful enraged about what is going on in the Vatican, with our local bishops, and with their obsequious servants. He warned about, quote, armchair theologians, armchair ecclesiologists. Odd, it struck me, that he had just minutes earlier praised both St. Monica and St. Catherine of Siena for their respective geniuses, one as a mother, the other as a mystic theologian. Neither had obtained any initials after their names. In fact, their charitable outrage at and firm action against what they understood was wrong all around them is what, in large part, rendered them saints. Turns out that the real sons and daughters of God, true geniuses, know first that it's not about the letters after your name that matter, but before. Want to be really informed, really awakened? Do not read some associate professor of his history at DePaul. Read Thaddeus Young or Tom Woods or Stephen
Thaddeus
Kinzer.
Russell.
What did I say?
You said Thaddeus Young.
Oh, my bad. Thaddeus, that's a basketball player. Thaddeus Russell or Tom Woods or Stephen Kinzer. Current events, go for Mr. James Dellingpole and not Miss Joe Rogan. Is knowledge of the current condition and ineffable teaching of the Catholic Church what you desire? You are much better off listening to Avoiding Babylon with a Long Island construction worker and a cantankerous Minnesotan. Are there any other kinds? Neither have MDivs or even MATs, but their faith and love of God render their shows more enlightening and informative than some garbage show from the ever kowtowing Bishop Robert Barron. There is a hell, and listening to Barron mollify church teaching and placate all his guests is a glimpse of it. Don't even get me started about how your average DO is a much more effective and knowledgeable health provider than your run-of-the-mill MD. The etymology of armchair expert comes down to us from 1809, when the phrase first appeared in English publications, denoting someone who is not a professional, so must work from home in an armchair. I am interested if the phrase and its negative connotation became popular because the existential archenemy of Britain at the time, Napoleon Bonaparte, appeared to be ruling on both domestic and foreign affairs as a sort of armchair dictator. I did not gain such a curiosity nor proper historical contextualization from my years of schooling in history. The fact that I had to write and then publish and then teach the history of the late French Revolution gained for me such expertise. Experience and practice made perfect. The osteopath, the skeptic, the midwife, the farmer, the Austrian economist, the conspiracy theorist, the entrepreneur, the anti-vaxxer, the anarchist, the saint. Get comfortable with the armchair.
All right, time for Charlie's feedback.
Yeah, I said it earlier. I think it's one of my favorite articles on the website. And it reminds me a lot of the anti-graduation speech and how these credentials in the first place probably didn't mean a whole lot, but especially now after these institutions have just become laughable and corrupted, it just becomes increasingly more ridiculous to care about, like you say, the letters at the end of their name.
Yeah, it dawns upon me too that perhaps the most insidious and harmful, injurious effect of progressivism is that in progressives capturing the credential institutions, particularly universities, which are they've replaced the other means to the point where universities have a monopoly on determining for, in large part, employers the human capital of the people they might employ. And so, for example, something that was still scandalous to me, just about several weeks ago, so 2 or 3 weeks ago, so maybe a little less time, I came across that, and something I wasn't aware, and I didn't really even, I should have verified this, but someone can. Do you know that credit scores, individual credit scores, did not exist until the mid 1970s?
No.
So one might call risk profile, or the ability for you to take out a loan, your credit worthiness, let's call it, was in large part determined upon the assertion, or the more so the process by which a loan agent, let's say at a bank, would determine through your character and then other factors, your reliability, your truthworthiness, whether you should be afforded credit, rather than a calculation. So what I mean by that is, when you have it's very easy, once an ideological group has captured institutions, they're able to, through the power of those institutions, grant these imprimaturs and seals and functions to people. Whereas it used to be, and I would argue still ought to be, a question of what you can do rather than what some grouping, whether it's a pseudo union like the American Medical Association or the Bar Association, or whatever dentists do, like American Dental Association, whatever these credential associations are in any profession. And of course, I'm thinking of all these instances wherein you have geniuses. Henry Hazlitt. Henry Hazlitt didn't even go to college. And one could easily argue that in terms of popular, widespread impact, in terms of distilling economics as a discipline to a massive audience of Americans through his, for example, columns in the New York Times, Henry Hazlitt was the most impactful, outside of Keynes, unfortunately, economist in the United States in the 20th century. Lysander Spooner, Lysander Spooner, the greatest, most articulate, eloquent writer and defender of anarchism as a political ideology in the entire 19th century, was not formally schooled. He practiced law without any formal legal scholarship. He just went to a law firm and learned. If we're, and then we have other areas and disciplines. I mean, Guglielmo Marconi, the inventor of the radio, he just got into a barn and started experimenting through practical scientific application. And this is, by the way, chronicled quite well in Eric Larson, the journalist who is more so known as a historian today, but he had no, or not a lot of formal training in history before he wrote Devil in the White City, and then this book Thunderstruck, in which he chronicles this, how Marconi was a practical scientist. He wasn't born from the theoretical schools at universities. And could we argue that in the latter half of the 19th century, anyone had a greater impact on communication technology than Marconi? I think you'd have a hard time. So thus, we're left with these institutions. We now trust institutions which are obviously owned by all of these ill-intentioned, malevolent, and nefarious meta institutions, we might call them, or meta movements and ideologies that either compromise because of identity politics, DEI, or what have you, and lower standards so as to continue their impact on society, or they're directed in such a way that it just advances their own cause, rather than, for example, the American Medical Association doing what maybe people think it ought to have done during a public health crisis, and rather than silencing and censoring their members or trying to revoke the licenses of medical practitioners who dared defy the establishment position, should they not have been defending such individuals? My point being here is that in a healthy society and in a really effective and efficacious, productive, and dynamic free market, you don't have those institutions dominating. Instead, the capable, through meritocracy, rise. And instead, the capable and the meritocratic, the worthy, are always suppressed, they're censored, they're castigated, they're scorned. And so it is something of an irony when you'll hear progressives especially talk about their animus toward the church. They'll bring up episodes like the Inquisition or Galileo. And yet these are the same people that are going to weaponize social media companies and cheer them on and cheer on the government owning Facebook, to such an extent that even Zuckerberg has to come out this week and admit that that they became a censorship arm of the federal government for years because of fear of revoking their Section 230 status, right? So what it ends up happening, the worthy, the innovators, yes, indeed, through a variety of policies and the governmentalities that are united with these institutions, they, as we might call it, well, sure enough, they're right engaged in the house arrest of the greatest and most worthy people in society. And no civilization can survive if, through the division of labor and the tremendous dynamism of the various talents that are on display and given to us, and which we're imbued with by God, are not allowed to flourish. The more regulation, the more castigation, the more, I don't know, you name it, the more elimination. I sound like Jesse Jackson now. Or the ostracizing of individuals, the more you're going to have consumers who are left without the ability to really flourish, or society without the ability to flourish.
As far as the credentials go, obviously we agree that they have declined a bunch, but would you say that there was ever a time where some of these titles really mattered and showed expertise? And obviously it's the age of the armchair now, but what if this was, say, 20 years ago?
When did they matter? So yes, on the question of whether these credentials and licensure associations, did their stamp of approval ever have real meaning? Well, here's the thing. I suppose they did at one time. And of course, we'd have to look and look at what the standards were for someone to be, but we know how low the standards have fallen. I mean, you have all these instances where take a look at what an eighth grader had to take in terms of an exam in mathematics or history in 1910 and what an eighth grader has to take now. It's a different world. It's a totally different set of standards. And they're so low. The tyranny of low expectations is alive and well and thriving, unfortunately. But I think what we've lost is, and this reminds me of that time, I don't know, remember when it was at Freedom Fest when you and I were sitting in the crowd and there was that guy that got up and said, "Oh, how terrible it is. We're losing trust in our institutions. We're
Oh
gonna and you
gosh.
and I looked at each other like, "Oh my God." And people in the crowd were getting mad and that guy was just a CIA plant like Mark Skousen. But so they were buddy buddy and obviously that's how he got his time. But think about that for a moment. I mean, we've lost, there's this immense deference, a slavish, again, I'll use the word obsequious, deference to, oh, well, it's the Bar Association. The American Bar Association would never recommend a judge who doesn't know constitutional law. Are you kidding? The Bar Association is made up of people who couldn't care less about any constitutional theory, right? Or the document itself. I mean, a case in point, I remember in their book, Kevin Gutzman and Tom Woods have a book called Who Killed the Constitution? And they talked about people who were sitting for the bar exam, even to the day in which it was written. So I think came out maybe 2012, 2013. But they said, look, when you are about to take the bar exam, the people who help you through the exam and prep you, they say to the people about to take the bar, if there's a choice that says 10th Amendment, it's never right. It's never right. Just eliminate that right away. It's never the correct answer. So it shows you how owned, how unfree, directed, and just monovocal, just of one voice. These prominent, highfalutin, if you want to use the word I used in the essay, these institutions are and how harmful they are, because we don't have a mechanism anymore. Maybe because we're so distracted by a variety of things. I don't know what the cause would be, but we could criticize or go on the attack. Yeah, I think of remember when what's the organization, AARP? They're the ones that run they do the senior citizen advocacy and stuff like that. Well, the animus and then redirection of these institutions isn't entirely dead. So maybe I'm painting too dark a picture, but because when AARP started going off the rails and was just openly funneling members' contributions, and they were doing shakedowns and then funding Democratic and very liberal politicians in their campaigns, there was a different organization that formed. And it was so for American conservative boomers.
Yeah.
So we do have that, but there's almost there comes with that, and I don't know if this is just slothfulness, but if there's an alternative to the standing establishment institutions that dole out these credentials, then immediately we kind of are skeptical of that, as if it's a poor imitation or replica of AARP or the American Bar Association, or that if you have a qualifier. It's funny because we don't ever examine the systems and the standards by which the American Dental Association determines someone's a dentist or a master dentist or orthodontist or something like that, or oral surgeon, right? But we do then say if there's qualifiers, like for example, a group of if a group of Muslim dentists created the American Muslim Dental Association, it'd be like, oh, that's not real, right? So again, a healthy society would be, and a healthy market in its operation would be constantly assessing what are the potential as well as real benefits of people operating within this group profession, and not just say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to trust that this person's really smart and has a high IQ because they have their sociology degree from Harvard. That is a dumb, dumb concession.
Yeah.
Whereas as individuals, the individuals I mentioned earlier, Marconi, Spooner, I mean, think of, would you rather learn? Okay, so Thomas Sowell is not a historian by trade. He's an economist by trade. But who would you rather learn history from? Thomas Sowell when he spoke about it? Ludwig von Mises as he spoke about it? Or would you rather learn it from the pick your random associate professor from DePaul or Tulane? Hands down, I'd rather sit at Thomas Sowell's feet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the death of meritocracy.
Yeah. And hopefully, just because of you could call them, although I don't think there's a proper word for it, the confines of reality, or what we would call natural law. When planes start falling out of the sky, or when you get the wrong kidney removed, the market has a mechanism and a response to that, and that people are outraged. Reputations are therefore ruined. So this can only go on so far. And maybe the bright light here is that a case in point, I love these arguments for, I saw that, you ever see that interview? I forget who the interviewer was, but it was a Hoover Institute piece where Thomas Sowell, the aforementioned Thomas Sowell, is sitting down and he's asked, well, Dr. Sowell, you've railed against the Federal Reserve System. If we get rid of the Federal Reserve, what will replace it? He goes, and Thomas Sowell takes back, he goes, this is kind of like Michael Saylor when he's asked about Bitcoin, the nature of Bitcoin. And Thomas Sowell says, look, if someone removes a cancer from your body, you don't say, how do I replace it? Or what do I replace it with? So, the point being is that we have to get back to a genuine social and individual assessment of the abilities, the real abilities and capacities of individuals, rather than lazily relying upon, oh, well, this person has initials after their name, and so therefore they must be the bee's knees in their profession. That's a very dangerous and sometimes painful place to be. Should we get to someone who's kind of an armchair historian?
Sure. I'm not super familiar with this guy. So,
Okay, so over the past month or so, I picked up a book that I've long wanted to read, and since Iran, given the Middle Eastern conflict, is so much in the news, this is a book that dates back to 2003, and it's a book by the journalist Stephen Kinzer, who happens to be from Oak Park, Illinois.
no way.
Yeah. So he but he's a good
I don't believe it.
He even goes so far as to say in his acknowledgments of the book, he thanks the Oak Park library system for helping him with doing research, or at least allowing him a forum in which to do his work and reading and composition. So there you go. But remember, this is back in 2000. Are you there? I froze. So this is back in 2003. So maybe, just maybe, there were sane people who worked in the library system. I don't
Oh,
know.
2003.
Yeah, it was a different world. It was a different world. So, yeah, Kinzer wrote,
2003 is a completely different Oak Park. Sorry to cut
yeah,
you off
it's an
there,
eon
but
ago. Yeah,
it's a different galaxy.
sure, sure. So Kinzer is by trade, he was a journalist, but like the aforementioned Eric Larson and other journalists who, remember, history is just a investigation of the past. So if you're a good journalist, then those skills can transfer. Now you're going to lose out on some of what we might call the professional, analytical, and evaluative skills. And the ability, I think, large part what journalists who turn historians do is that they solely rest on telling a good yarn. And that's important. Don't get me wrong, because there are bad historians who are very scholarly and they can't write or write effectively and convey information. But they really rely, as we might suspect, on their ability to investigate a story and do the what would be the word, kind of finding a case, okay, and then presenting the case as a lawyer might do. They're going to miss out on pulling in, for example, other attendant disciplines. So, case in point here, I mean, Kinzer doesn't get into economic history of Iran, correct? Because he's just not familiar with it. And to his credit, he doesn't seem like that's up his alley. And therefore, the book is limited to that. And that's fine, because it's a very worthy book to read in the sense that it gives you such a background. The subtitle of the book, of All the Shah's Men, is An American Coup and the Roots of Middle Eastern Terror. So, those who don't know, in 1953, the CIA orchestrated a coup of the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and reinstalled the Shah. Yes, the famous Shah, who was later deposed in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Right. What is compelling about, first, the historical connections here are just breathtaking in how scandalous they are. So you'll never guess. I think I shared this with you before. The man who was primarily responsible for orchestrating the coup against this popular figure, Mossadegh, democratically elected, again, this idea that the United States is some purveyor of democracy and defender of democracy in the world is just a ridiculous notion. But 1953, 8 years out of the war to preserve democracy through the arsenal of democracy, thank you, FDR, we're toppling democratic regimes. And the man who was responsible, Kermit Roosevelt, the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. I'm not shitting you, is in the CIA. He does he orchestrates the whole thing. But I mean, there's other scandalous notes here that I should note. John Foster Dulles, the Dulles brothers. Remember, I think it was last episode, or maybe it was even off the air, where I said we might have to do a show as to what pairing of brothers or relatives in terms of last names have been the most disastrous, demonically so, in American history. And I threw out the Sherman brothers, the Rockefellers, the Roosevelts, and we have to add the Dulleses because John Foster Dulles, as Secretary of State under Eisenhower, and uh, Allen Dulles, who was the director of the CIA under Eisenhower, were the men who put this all in motion. They're the ones who convinced Eisenhower, who was skeptical like Truman. To Truman's credit, he was very skeptical of toppling this regime and getting involved. And by the way, so ask if this sounds familiar to you. The major reason that we were involved, for the most part, although they conjure up this notion that Mossadegh is prone to allowing the Soviet Union to come in and communism might spread to Iran, which was always just a red herring. The major reason was because the British had essentially established an oil monopoly over Iranian oil. They built on this island sort of city in Iran called Abadan enormous refineries. I mean, the whole island outside of really luxurious residences for the workers of the British Petroleum Company, or it was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. They lived in luxury. The Iranian workers lived in hovels. So we were fighting a war in large part as a proxy and a substitute to make sure Britain continued its oil monopoly in Iran. That's why we toppled the guy and installed the Shah as de facto totalitarian monarch over Iran, just as his father had been. Incidentally, the British ousted him when he didn't agree to their terms in 1942 during the war. All right, so let me get more scandalous here. The man who the British, including Kermit Roosevelt and the Dulleses, tabbed to replace Mossadegh as the prime minister of Iran was this guy, General Fazlullah Zahidi. You'll never guess. During the war, he was imprisoned by the British in Iran because he was a Nazi agent. He was cooperating with the Germans and the Nazis to such an extent that the British put him under house arrest during the war. So in this whole operation, from beginning to end, the CIA called it Operation Ajax. The SIS, that's the British CIA, Secret Information Services, later MI6 today, as it's known. They called it Operation Boot. Not unlike NASA, right? There's this. Reading this book makes you really come to the consideration that, and it's something we really have to understand, is that the whole paradigm, the whole idea that the world had to be saved from Nazism by the liberal democracies of Britain and the United States is just, it becomes laughably and risibly absurd. I mean, think about it. If it was what was really at stake was what power was going to be able to, in the emergence after the war, take on the Nazis as employees that they wanted, the most capable of them, right?
Yeah.
And I always forget the name of the guy who they tabbed as the head of NASA, the first head of NASA.
Oh, I know who it is. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'll talk while you look it up. Okay.
No, I kind of want to remember it. It's embarrassing
It's
that I don't know this.
Not von
Von,
Ribbentrop. That's the First World War general.
oh my gosh, you're talking about Operation Paperclip, Werner von
Yes.
Braun,
Oh yeah,
unbelievable.
von Braun, of course. And so they're working with Nazi collaborators who were essentially agents of the Nazis. And they're like, well, yeah, he's the best guy. So we're going to throw him in there. I mean, of course, above and beyond, again, this absurdity about fighting for democracy. What are you talking about? You're engaged within the very early onset after the war in horrific crimes against uh, peoples throughout the world to advance your agency or to advance American power. The Council of Foreign Relations basically wrote up the plans. I mean, Council of Foreign Relations, major founders, all employed by the Rockefellers. David Rockefeller was an early founder of the Council of Foreign Relations. Colonel House, who was the closest advisor to Woodrow Wilson, was on the Council of Foreign Relations. I mean, I forget the guy who was the first president, but he was it wasn't Elihu Root, it was someone else from the Theodore Roosevelt administration. I mean, these guys are just skull and bones, horrific globalists, all very nefarious actors. Uh, of course, think about the formula here. The Dulles brothers and Kermit Roosevelt, prior to the actual coup in 53, were fomenting uprisings and mob actions. All of them were artificial. Victoria Nuland probably has read this CIA briefing. She did the same thing in Ukraine. All of them were artificial. And then it was the riots and violence that broke out in what seemed to be anti-Mossadegh uprisings in Tehran that led Eisenhower to conclude that the coup ought to be taken up. And again, think about this too. So the way the Dulleses were able to move Eisenhower to support the coup reluctantly, albeit, was that they continued, and they actually, we have documents of them talking to each other and other officials like Averell Harriman, who's a disaster in himself, saying that if we just keep saying communism, communism, communism in front of Eisenhower, then he'll get spooked and he'll finally just say, okay, and look at the language that they used was, if Iran falls to communism, then what's to stop Iraq, and then Transjordan, and then Syria. So it's just the domino theory applied to the Middle East, as it was going to be very shortly applied in Southeast Asia. I mean, yeah, these are all learned people. The Dulleses both went to Princeton. I mean, a lot of these guys, in fact, a lot of the British agents that were operative in Iran were Persian experts. But they were there. This is the thing about international relations, and more so the understanding of what constitutes imperialism, is that when you get government involved in international relations, it always facilitates, through preferential treatment and protectionism, the companies and interests that are going to be usurpative of natural resources, of human capital, of wealth from these distant lands. But wherein you have individual corporations, I when I was doing my Libertarian Scholars Conference way back in 2019, there was a girl, Daniela Bassi, who works at Mises Institute. She did a whole paper on how the Hudson Bay Company in North America was actually an agent for good. And they were controlling how much mink and fox and beaver they were culling, so as to ensure that they didn't go out of business by ruining the ecology. But then when the British government got directly involved, that's all got screwed up. So same thing here. When gunboats from the government are used to intimidate and provide not just protective nation trade status, but a monopoly of trade and business and commerce between a power like Britain and like that in Iran, well, then gone are the natural mechanisms by which there could have been great material, cultural, social exchange. Government ruining everything again.
Yeah.
And when there's fears stoked by the military industrial complex and the new immense espionage and information apparatus that was created to the great consternation, worry, and sadness of the post-war presidents like Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. And we know what happens when you get too vocal or lippy against that intelligence agency. You get a bullet or several in the back, front, and side lobe of your head, as you would in Dallas, as one did in Dallas. So it's just and the fact that so I wrote up something that I thought I would read, and you can tell me, it was just reading again through this book that this flowed out of me. The American foreign policy is, and perhaps always has been, and sadly might always be, a muddled mess of utmost avarice, libido dominandi, and national messianism. The toxins in this stew, created by the concoction of bringing them together, always leads to disaster and violence. The CIA, MI6, SIS emerge, no matter what the operation, reputations unscathed. And like an unhinged child who can't hold a bat properly, proclaim for themselves an authority of that of an MLB Hall of Famer. Meanwhile, the American people are left propagandized by the most vapid of nationalistic myths. They are so denuded of reality that they accept both the bill for these adventures and foreign enmity logically directed to them. Willing targets, they become willing targets of insane zealotry, of a supposed democracy, and the misplaced notion of a propositional nation. Isn't it logical? And Dave and Robbie have talked about this on several occasions on Part of the Problem. When Dave talks about, he did this with his debate with Laura Loomer about the legitimacy of Israel bombing and going to war with Gaza because, well, the Gazans supported Hamas way back in 2009 or 2007, last time they held elections. So therefore, they voiced their support for this terrorist organization. Well, in that case, if you're going to extend the logic, how much are you and I then guilty? Now, you might say we don't live in a functional democracy, but neither did the people of Gaza. At least we were alive to see that you and I didn't do much to stop, nor did we have the power, but we could still say that the Biden administration or the Obama administration or the Trump administration from doing these heinous acts. I mean, you're less guilty than I am because I've been alive throughout this. And it's been a constant, unadulterated, unremitting war of hedonistic, military-industrial complex, nation-building, constant interference, constant coups, evisceration of the real sovereignty of foreign peoples, to the bankruptcy, the destitution, and the destruction of the American middle class. And to Ron Paul's point, whether you believe that that 9/11 is orchestrated by the autistic, crazy son of and debilitated son of a construction magnate in Saudi Arabia hiding out in Afghani caves, okay, or it's Mossad, right? Either way, we're the targets. And doesn't the rest of the world have a better argument than that we're justifiably targets than some 3-year-old in Gaza City?
Yeah.
Yeah. Logically extended. In other words, if you're interested in the subject matter, I'll do a short write-up and book review for the blog when I'm totally done with the book. But it's a great read, again, from an armchair historian who's much better at the craft than anyone you're going to find at a university outside of Sean McMeekin if you go to Bard. Because that guy's a genius. And Tom Woods and Thaddeus Russell, who are actual historians. And there are others too, don't get me wrong.
Do you want to talk about the town where he did some of the writing and research for the book?
Let's do it.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
We go to your gay suburb now.
The people segment. Meanwhile in Oak Park. First story, we've got OP Parent Group says high school is right age for smartphones.
Ooh, look at the hairline on that poor guy.
Smartphones on Hold launched its website in mid-August.
I'm sorry, but for those of you watching the video, dude, you got to shave that. I mean, I'm known to talk about hairlines, but that's brutal. What are you holding on to?
Yeah, at least you gave it up.
Yeah, throw in the towel, man. I mean, this guy's holding on to scraps.
A new Oak Park parent organization is hoping to ignite a conversation regarding smartphones on a local level with the creation of Smartphones on Hold, a grassroots initiative to help parents navigate their kids' use of handheld devices. Gideon Bob, an Oak Park resident, said the idea for the group came from his desire.
He's the one with the hairline. I know you're all shocked.
Came from his desire to address the topic before his kids enter middle school. The aim is to help create a community of families that are choosing to abstain from using smartphones until the end of 8th grade. Quote, "This is not the sky is falling. This is not the idea. That is not the feeling," Bob said. This is new technology that is
Bob.
This is new technology that is newly being given to young people, and it is something that needs to be navigated and figured out. Bob said he felt the natural breaking point when these conversations between students and parents begin to occur is middle school, as kids are receiving more independence and others begin to get their first phones. It's a decision by default, he said. Concerned over hearing how smartphones are major distractors at the middle school level, along with seeing his 9th grade Sunday school students at his temple choose to be on their phones rather than engaging in personal interactions during breaks, Bob said he wanted to find a way to help address the issue without fully excluding children.
I'm sorry, but if it's between my iPhone and the Talmud, I'm going with my iPhone. Rob, by the way, I had a long exchange with Robbie about, he had put out a Talmud episode. I had so many questions, so I was texting him like up a storm, and he was answering me back. One day, maybe I'll get his permission to share those. Still, go with the iPhone.
Quote, "I don't want her, his daughter, to be socially excluded I also don't want to give them the entire internet in their pocket and have this constant distraction," Bob said. "The solution is not to simply avoid giving your child a smartphone," said Bob, parent to a 3rd and 5th grader at Longfellow Elementary, "but to create a community that places value in waiting." Bob connected with his friend Kelly Cribbs, a parent at Longfellow, and the two launched Smartphones on Hold. The first meeting was held back in March. The website launched on Monday, August 19th. It already has over 130 families signed up, saying they will be waiting until high school to give their children smartphones. While there are national organizations such as Wait Until 8th, having grassroots local organization can encourage Oak Park parents to feel more invested and personally connected with the movement, along with showing their children how many other families are also waiting to give their children a smartphone. Quote, "You can see your friends and neighbors on the list," Bob said. "The public listening of being able to see each other, to be able to generate momentum, I thought was the real value, the real thing that would solve the problem." Oh my gosh. Calling the parent organization a big tent group, cribs shared with local parents in the Oak Park Working Moms Facebook group. Oh gosh. That the initiative.
We got to get in there.
Yeah, I'm on the wait list. That the initiative is a place where parents can come together, quote, without judgment. The website lists flip phones and smartwatches as, quote, practical choices that still keep in line with the mission. Additionally, Bob said parents have chosen to simply strip away smartphones, essentially dumbing them down to the basic functions such as calling, photos, and GPS. Quote, we understand every parent is doing their best for their own family, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution, Cribs said via the post. As smartphone usage increases in young adults and children, so do parental concerns over the long-term repercussions. According to a 2021 Common Sense Media census, 42% of kids have a phone by the age of 10, and by the age of 14, that number has increased to 91%. A 2023 study by Common Sense Media analyzing smartphone data found that teens use their phones daily for an average of over 4 hours per day, picking up their phones an average of 51 times per day. The same study found that students are more likely to turn to social media on their cell phone during the school day. Bob said parents who have participated in the meetings have raised various levels of concerns, ranging from social media, increased anxiety levels, and an increase in addiction to phones. The consequences range from minimal to possibly huge consequences, he said. With the goal of breaking
consequences.
With the goal of breaking down the illusion that everyone has a smartphone before high school, smartphones on hold will help create an intentional norm around delaying access to the handheld technology. Quote, we've all come here chasing this high value, high community life, he said. We're willing to trade our yard and square footage to be closer to our neighbors. So this says, here is what my neighbor is doing. Let's do this together, is the idea. Wow. Okay.
I'm glad that they didn't, at the very least, they didn't petition the village to get involved. I'm glad this is organic.
Yeah, this is a lot more wholesome than most of the stories.
Right. And I appreciate the fact that they didn't say this is the one-size-fits-all univocal solution.
Yeah. There's some nuance, and for a second I thought it was 10 years ago.
Yes. That's right. And in a different place, in a different dimension.
Yeah. The nostalgia of 2014 Oak Park.
These guys are walking around the library where Stephen Kinzer was writing.
Oh, this is just boring.
Oh, it's that Amanda Seyfried woman again.
Yeah. Oak Park D97 navigates extreme heat wave during first full week of classes.
Screw that. How do they navigate it?
The heat wave has been affecting the Chicagoland area and reached, quote, extreme levels on Tuesday, with a heat index up to 110 to 115.
It was smoky out there.
Nah, it was definitely not cool.
No.
Yeah, schools shut down now. D97 chose to remain open and in person on Monday and Tuesday. But after school sports and activities were canceled out of an, quote, abundance of caution. Water breaks.
Yeah, every time I see that name Amanda Seyfried, I go, oh, it's the cute actress, but
no,
it's not.
It's not.
No.
OP Housing Trust Fund applications are now open if you're looking.
Woo! Get me in there.
The fund helps.
Then I can be part of the Oak Park Mothers Club.
The fund, yeah, I need to get into the Working Moms Facebook group.
Working Moms, yeah.
The fund helps Oak Park to provide local affordable housing. Oak Park is accepting applications on a rolling basis for housing trust fund dollars, the intention of which is to provide and preserve affordable housing in the village. The total balance of the trust fund is about $1.95 million. When funds are exhausted, any remaining applicants will be placed on a waiting list, and the village board could decide if and how to fund additional projects. Oak Park has been working to improve affordable housing options to support socioeconomic diversity in a densely populated area where the cost of living is about 23% higher than the national average. How about we talk about this for a second?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, why is it 23% higher?
Oh, wow. The question that's never asked.
And then they pull up the Economic Research Institute. Is Oak Park an expensive place to live? Question mark.
Bet your ass. Wow, it's 9th out of 286 cities in Illinois. That's expensive.
And it's in the top 1,000 for
Yeah.
housing.
Uh,
What?
how is the housing cheaper?
43rd highest cost of labor? I don't get this. How is
Yeah.
nothing above average?
Yeah, they must be. I don't know what they're trying to get to. This graph, we break down the overall cost of living, ERA downloads,
Gasoline consumes.
but it has nothing to do with housing. Anyway, well, that can't be right because the housing is absurdly high. All right, go to the down like average salary. Median house price is $403,000. Now, mind you, a lot of those homes are not full family homes. They're not independent units,
Yeah.
condos and apartments and like. So can you imagine the median price is 403,000? Yeah, they're gonna need all that, almost $2 million to subsidize their what was it, multi socioeconomic diversity in their village.
At least it's got a good walk score.
Yeah, it better.
Total crime is higher than the national average.
Property
Robbery
crime.
is way higher.
Look at property crime and larceny,
Yeah.
vehicle theft. It's next to Chicago too. Total crime. Yeah. Oh wait, read that paragraph where it says how expensive is it to live in Oak Park? It's 23% more expensive than national average and 21% more expensive to live than the average city in Illinois. It assumes a $72,000 annual salary and a 2-bedroom apartment. Food costs in Oak Park are as affordable as affordable. What? Food costs in Oak Park
You're
are
reading
as
that right.
affordable than average in the United States. Transportations. This is so poorly written.
Okay, so this is supposed to be okay, so it's below average in affordability. We're kind of being
Oh,
dumb.
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Good luck.
What's health? Is that just out of pocket? Okay, got it.
Yeah, out of pocket costs. I'm sure your healthcare premiums. Whew. That's expensive.
I didn't know if that had to do with paying Dr. Teresa Chapel or something. If it was
Magruder.
getting that deep.
She's
Anyways,
gone. Isn't she in Hawaii or something?
I don't
Back
know.
in Hawaii. Have they filled her spot yet with someone other than the
I don't
deputy
think so.
secretary of
I'm sure that
minority affairs?
I'm sure that they're in the opening steps of putting together a hiring council.
They're
to
having the
find-
conversation about the hiring council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it kind of just breaks down what we just said. Applicants can apply online. Oak Park has 5,341 affordable housing units for a population of more than 52,000 residents. That means only 23.4% of all village housing is affordable for home buyers who make 80% of the regional median income and for renters who make 60% of the median income. Yikes.
That's not good.
No.
And what's the major expenditure? It's not even the mortgage. It's if you own, it's the property tax.
Right.
So what if you just had how about this radical idea? What if instead of spending and creating a trust fund in which, of course, the local politicians all get credit for throwing in a few disadvantaged families to mix things up, of course. Why don't you give a property tax holiday? Can you imagine how stimulative that would be to the local economy?
That'd be awesome.
Just
Will
do it for
never
a year.
happen.
See what
Will
happens.
never happen.
Yeah.
This part's funny. In 2024, the village board has already supported other affordable housing initiatives, including the development of Keystone Apartments on Madison Street, work to expand, quote, missing middle housing options, and the implementation of an Airbnb tax
Unbelievable.
to aid affordable housing services.
Yeah.
The Oak Park Housing Authority also administers housing choice vouchers for low-income households. All right, so communism.
An Airbnb tax.
Communism.
Wow.
This is the people segment.
Boom.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay? It's a communism.
Oh yeah.
Here we go.
It's so funny. We had to go. The Eisenhower administration had to go and promote a coup to reinstall Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the dictator of Iran to stave off communism in Iran, only
Yeah.
for it to be totally operative
They
in
did
a
a great
Chicago
job.
suburb.
Yeah. They knocked it out of the park.
Oh, they did. They did. Hall of Fame, baby.
All right.
Yeah.
That's an episode. What else we got? Anything?
By Trinitine Brewing
Amen.
stuff, and a happy and blessed feast day of the great saint and doctor of the church, Saint Augustine of Hippo. If you're not a believer, if you're one of the infidel out there, just pick up something by Augustine and see if you can remain unmoved as to the message and core of the salvific mission of Christ and his church.
Yeah.
Good luck. I hope you submit. Holy submission. Till next
All right,
time.
everyone. Yep.
Peace.
God bless.